Hello, can you hear me now? Welcome, crew and new listeners. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high. Get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, November 20th, Monday, November 21st, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I am your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. I hope you had an awesome week and a rocking weekend so far, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on one of our many outlets. If you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us on KPNL Radio, which you can find at KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. You may also find us live on Saturday nights, I believe, at eTalk Radio on etalk.tv/radio. And we are also live at this moment under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker. If you want to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, make sure you pop in those earbuds, put on those wireless headphones. Check us out once more under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. Don't forget to go on over to our Facebook, We Are Paradox Media. That's where we are most active throughout the week. We generally have a message from the universe, which we get from the Healing Energies, I believe it is, site. And we share that every day, generally. Sometimes life gets in the way, and yeah, there aren't any posties, but when we do post, you better pull up your big boy or big girl pants and yeah, strap in because we got some really funny stuff out there. It's important to laugh, it releases endorphins. If you would please go mosey on over to our YouTube. Please subscribe. It's free, it doesn't cost anything. If you listen to any of our videos, I need to go back in and update the thumbnails. I think life is going to hit a different pace coming up soon as far as positive. I'm starting a job tomorrow, working with a really wonderful young lady named Tassie, and I'm super excited about that. Tomorrow I have to pick her up from work and take her shopping, and I don't know. It's going to be awesome. I'm super stoked. And I do that, like, it's not a 40-hour a week job. You know, there's not a lot of hours, but I'm doing other things as well, hauling cars, etc. So it's going to be pretty intriguing. Thank you. So what else? Yes. So tonight we have story time with me, TessaTNT. So you guys get your favorite fuzzy couch blanket or recliner blanket, whatever you may need. Right now, I'm in my fuzzy jammies and I'm quite comfortable. It is basically really cold right now. It's so cold for November. Generally, we don't get weather like this. So I was looking at Celsius. But Fahrenheit, it is actually 57 degrees in here, so it's not too bad. So I believe this evening for story time, we will be finishing up Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Frankenstein, however you prefer to say it. And then we're going to be beginning the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I have something different for the show tonight. I'm going to try to use a little bit of background music. and I have 3 different playlists that I put together, and it's basically like one song just looped throughout. If you would, leave me a comment which one is your favorite. So the first time, for story time that we're using background music, we have the creeper. And then the next hour, we will be using the house. And then the third and final hour, we will be using the darkest child. So darkest child, the house, and the creeper. Let me know which one you prefer for background music, and we have a plethora of other music that we can use. So maybe we'll just use one for every hour. Just get a whole different thing going on. Pretty exciting. So let's try this out. This evening we begin on, holy shnikes, I believe this is chapter 24. Let me look over here really quick. Yes, 24. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. My present situation was one in which all voluntary thought was swallowed up and lost. I was hurried away by fury. Revenge alone endowed me with strength and composure. It molded my feelings and allowed me to be calculating and calm, at periods when otherwise delirium or death would have been my portion. My first resolution was to quit Geneva forever, my country, which, when I was happy and beloved, was dear to me, now, in my adversity, became hateful. I provided myself with a sum of money together with a few jewels which had belonged to my mother and departed. And now my wanderings began, which are to cease but with life. I have traversed a vast portion of the earth and have endured all the hardships which travelers in deserts, in barbarous countries, are wont to meet. How I have lived I hardly know. Many times have I stretched my failing limbs upon the sandy plain and prayed for death. But revenge kept me alive. I dared not die and leave my adversary in being. That is not even hardly coming through. Let me see. Turn it up. Let's go at 33. Still pretty quiet. That seems about right. When I quitted Geneva, my first labor was to gain some clue by which I might trace the steps of my fiendish enemy. But my plan was unsettled, and I wandered many hours round the confines of the town, uncertain what path I should pursue. As night approached, I found myself at the entrance of the cemetery, where William, Elizabeth, and my father reposed. I entered it and approached the tomb which marked their graves. Everything was silent except the leaves of the trees, which were gently agitated by the wind. The night was nearly dark, and the scene would have been solemn and affecting even to an uninterested observer. The spirits of the departed seemed to flit around and to cast a shadow, which was felt but not seen, around the head of the mourner. The deep grief which this scene had at first excited quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead, and I lived. Their murderer also lived, and to destroy him I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass and kissed the earth, and with quivering lips exclaimed, "By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and the spirits that reside over thee, to pursue the demon who caused this misery, until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this purpose I will preserve my life, to execute this dear revenge. Will I again behold the sun, and tread the green herbage of earth, which otherwise should vanish from my eyes forever? And I call on you, spirits of the dead, and on you, wandering ministers of vengeance, to aid and conduct me in my work. Let the cursed and hellish monster drink deep of agony. Let him feel the despair that now torments me. I had begun my adjuration with solemnity, and an awe which almost assured me that the shades of my murdered friends heard and approved my devotion. But the Furies possessed me as I concluded, and rage choked my utterance. I was answered through the stillness of night by a loud and fiendish laugh. It rang in my ears long and heavily. The mountains re-echoed it, and I felt as if all hell surrounded me with mockery and laughter. Surely, in that moment, I should have possessed by frenzy and have destroyed my miserable existence. But that my vow was heard and that I was reserved for vengeance. The laughter died away when a well-known and abhorred voice, apparently close to my ear, addressed me in an audible whisper. I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and I am satisfied. I darted towards the spot from which the sound proceeded, but the devil eluded my grasp. Suddenly, the broad disk of the moon arose and shone full upon his ghastly and distorted shape, as he fled with more than mortal speed. I pursued him, and for many months this has been my task. Guided by a light clue, I followed the windings of the Rhone, but vainly. The blue Mediterranean appeared, and, by a strange chance, I saw the fiend enter by night, and hide himself in a vessel bound for the Black Sea. I took my passage in the same ship, but he escaped, I know not how. Amidst the wilds of Tartary in Russia, although he still evaded me, I have ever followed in his tracks. Sometimes the peasants, scared by this horrid apparition, informed me of his path. Sometimes he himself, who feared that if I lost all trace of him, I should despair and die, left some mark to guide me. The snows descended on my head, and I saw the print of his huge step on the white plain. To you, first entering on life, to whom care is new, and agony unknown, how can you understand what I have felt and still feel? Cold, want, and fatigue were the least pains which I destined to endure. I was cursed by some devil and carried about with me my eternal hell. Yet still a spirit of good fellowed and directed my steps, and when I was murmured, would suddenly extricate me from seemingly unsurmountable difficulties. Sometimes, when nature, overcome by hunger, sunk under the exhaustion, a repast was prepared for me in the desert that restored and inspired me. The fare was, indeed, coarse, such as the peasants of the country ate, but I will not doubt that it was set there by the spirits that I had invoked to aid me. Often, when all was dry, the heavens cloudless, and I was parched by thirst, a slight cloud would bedim the sky, shed the few drops that revived me, and vanish. I followed, when I could, the courses of the river. Hold on a second. Man, my phone is going crazy with this charger. Rotating, let's see what we got. I followed, when I could, the courses of the rivers, but the demon generally avoided these, as it was here that the population of the country chiefly collected. In other places human beings were seldom seen, and I generally subsisted on the wild animals that crossed my path. I had money with me and gained the friendship of the villagers by distributing it, or I brought with me some food that I had killed, which, after taking a small part, I always presented to those who had provided me with fire and utensils for cooking. My life, as it passed thus, was indeed hateful to me, and it was during sleep alone that I could taste joy. O blessed sleep! Often, when most miserable, I sank to repose, and my dreams lulled me even to rapture. The spirits that guarded me had provided these moments, or rather hours, of happiness, that I might retain strength to fulfill my pilgrimage. Deprived of respite, I should have sunk under the hardships. During the day, I was sustained and inspirited by the hope of night. For in sleep I saw my friends, my wife, and my beloved country. Again, I saw the benevolent countenance of my father, heard the silver tones of my Elizabeth's voice, and beheld Clerval enjoying health and youth. Often, when wearied by a toilsome march, I persuaded myself that I was dreaming until night should come, and that I should enjoy reality in the arms of my dearest friends. What agonizing fondness did I feel for them! How did I cling to their dear forms, as sometimes they haunted even my waking hours, and persuade myself that they still live. At such moments, vengeance that burned within me died in my heart, and I pursued my path towards the destruction of the demon, more as a task enjoined by heaven, as the mechanical impulse of some power of which I was unconscious, than as the ardent desire of my soul. What his feelings were whom I pursued I cannot know. Sometimes indeed he left marks in writing on the barks of the trees, or cut in stone, that guided me and instigated my fury. My reign is not yet over. These words were legible in one of these inscriptions. You live, and my power is complete. Follow me. I seek the everlasting ices of the north, where I will feel the misery of cold and frost, to which I am impassive. You will find, near this place, if you follow not too tardily, a dead hare. Eat and be refreshed. Come on, my enemy. We have yet to wrestle for our lives, but many hard and miserable hours must you endure until that period shall arrive. Scoffing devil! Again do I vow vengeance. Again do I devote thee, miserable fiend, to torture and death. Never will I give up my search until he or I perish. And then with what ecstasy shall I join my Elizabeth and my departed friends, who just saw it. Where did it go? Who even now prepare for me the reward of my tedious toil and horrible pilgrimage. As I still pursued my journey to the northward, the snows thickened and the cold increased in a degree almost too severe to support. The peasants were shut up in their hovels, and only a few of the most hardy ventured forth to seize the animals whom starvation had forced from their hiding places to seek for prey. The rivers were covered with ice, and no fish could be procured, and thus I was cut off from my chief article of maintenance. The triumph of my enemy increased with the difficulty of my labors. One inscription that he left was in these words: "Prepare your toils, only begin. Wrap yourself in furs and provide food, for we shall soon enter upon a journey where your sufferings will satisfy my everlasting hatred." My courage and perseverance were invigorated by these scoffing words. I resolved not to fail in my purpose, and, calling on heaven to support me, I continued with unabated fervor to traverse immense deserts, until the ocean appeared at a distance and formed the utmost boundary of the horizon. Oh, how like and unlike it was to the blue seasons of the south. Covered with ice, it was only to be distinguished from land by its superior wilderness and ruggedness. The Greeks wept for joy when they beheld the Mediterranean from the hills of Asia, and held with rapture the boundary of their toils. I did not weep, but I knelt down, and, with a full heart, thanked my guiding spirit for conducting me in safety to the place where I hoped, notwithstanding my adversary's gibe, to meet and grapple with him. Some weeks before this period, I had procured a sled and dogs, and thus traversed the snows with inconceivable speed. I know not whether the fiend possessed the same advantages, but I found that, as before I had daily lost ground in the pursuit, I now gained on him, so much so that when I first saw the ocean, it was but one day's journey in advance, and I hoped to intercept him before he should reach the beach. With new courage, therefore, I pressed on, and in 2 days arrived at a wretched hamlet on the seashore. I inquired with inhabitations concerning the fiend, and gained accurate information. A gigantic monster, they said, had arrived the night before, armed with a gun and many pistols, putting to flight the inhabitants of a solitary cottage through fear of his terrific appearance. He had carried off their store of winter food, and placing it in a sledge to draw, which he had seized on a numerous drove of trained dogs, he had harnessed them, and the same night, to the joy of the horror-struck villagers, had resumed his journey across the sea in a direction that led to no land, and they conjectured that he must speedily be destroyed by the breaking of the ice or frozen by the eternal frosts. On hearing this information, I suffered a temporary access of despair. He had escaped me, and I must commence a destructive and almost endless journey across the mountain ices of the ocean, amidst cold that few of the inhabitants could long endure, in which I, the native of a genial and sunny climate, could not hope to survive. Yet, at the idea that the fiend should live and be triumphant, my rage and vengeance returned, and, like a mighty tide, overwhelmed every other feeling. After a slight repose, during which the spirits of the dead hovered round and instigated me to toil and revenge, I prepared for my journey. I exchanged my land sledge for one fashioned for the inequalities of the frozen ocean, and purchasing a plentiful stock of provisions, I departed from land. I cannot guess how many days have passed since then, but I have endured misery which nothing but the eternal sentiment of just retribution burning within my heart could have enabled me to support. Immense and rugged mountains of ice often barred up my passage, and I often heard the thunder of the ground sea, which threatened my destruction, but again the frost came and made the paths of the sea secure. By the quantity of provisions which I had consumed, I should guess that I had passed 3 weeks in this journey, and the continual retraction of hope returning back upon the heart often wrung bitter drops of despondency and grief from my eyes. Despair had indeed almost secured my prey, and I should soon have sunk beneath this misery, once after the poor animals that conveyed me had with incredible toil gained the summit of a sloping ice mountain, and one, sinking under his fatigue, died. I viewed the expanse before me with anguish, when suddenly my eye caught a dark speck upon the dusky plain. I straightened my sight to discover what it could be, and uttered a wild cry of ecstasy when I distinguished a sledge in the distorted proportions of a well-known form within. Oh, with what a burning gush did hope revisit my heart. Warm tears filled my eyes, which I hastily wiped away, that they might not intercept the view I had with the demon. But still my sight was dimmed by the burning drops until, giving way to the emotions that oppressed me, I wept aloud. Hello, beautiful Sister Sandra. But this was not the time for delay. I disencumbered the dogs of their dead companion, gave them a plentiful portion of food, and, after hours' rest, which was absolutely necessary, and yet which was bitterly irksome to me, I continued my route. The sledge was still visible, nor did I again lose sight of it, except at the moments when for a short time some ice rock concealed it with its intervening cracks. I indeed perceptibly gained on it, and when, after nearly 2 days' journey, I beheld my enemy no more than a mile distant, my heart bounded with me. But now, when I appeared almost within grasp of my foe, my hopes were suddenly extinguished, and I lost all trace of him more utterly than I had ever done before. The ground sea was heard, the thunder of its progress as the waters told and swelled beneath me became every moment more ominous and terrific. I pressed on, but in vain. The wind arose, the sea roared, and as with the mighty shock of an earthquake it split and cracked with a tremendous and overwhelming sound. The work was soon finished. In a few minutes, the tumultuous sea rolled between me and my enemy, and I was left drifting on a scattered piece of ice. It was continually lessening, and thus preparing for me a hideous death. In this manner appalling hours passed. Several of my dogs died, and I myself was about to sink under the accumulation of distress when I saw your vessel riding at anchor and holding forth to me hopes of succor and life. I had no conception that vessels ever came so far north, and was astounded at the sight. I quickly destroyed part of my sledge to construct oars, and by these means was enabled with infinite fatigue to move my ice raft in the direction of your ship. I had determined, if you were going southwards, still to trust myself to the mercy of the seas rather than abandon my purpose. I hoped to induce you to grant me a boat with which I could pursue my enemy, but your direction was northward. You took me on board when my vigor was exhausted, and I should soon have sunk under my multiplied hardships into a death which I still dread, for my task is unfulfilled. Oh, when will my guided spirit, in conducting me to the demon, allow me to rest? I so much desire, or must I die, and he yet live? If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, that you will seek him and satisfy my vengeance in his death. And do I dare ask you to undertake my pilgrimage, to endure the hardships that I have undergone? No, I am not so selfish. Yet, when I am dead, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear that he shall not live. Swear that he shall not triumph over the accumulated woes and survive to add to the list of his dark crimes. He is eloquent and persuasive, and once his words had even power over my heart, but trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call on the mains of William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, my father, and of the wretched victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the still aright. Walton in continuation, August 26th, 17 whatever. So, you have read this strange and terrific story, Margaret, and do you not feel your blood congeal with horror like that which even now curdles mine? Sometimes seized with sudden agony, he could not continue his tale; at others, his voice broken yet pierced, uttered with difficulty the words so replete with anguish. His fine and lovely eyes were now lighted up with indignation, now subdued to downcast sorrow, and quenched in infinite wretchedness. Sometimes he commanded his concurrence in tones, and related the most horrible incidents with a tranquil voice, suppressing every mark of agitation. Then, like a volcano bursting forth, his face would suddenly change to an expression of the wildest rage, as he shrieked out imprecations on his persecutor. His tale is connected and told with an appearance of the simplest truth. Yet I own to you that the letters of Felix and Safie, which he showed me, and the apparition of the monster seen from our ship, brought to me a greater conviction of truth of his narrative than his asseverations, however earnest and connected. Such a monster has, then, real existence. I cannot doubt it, yet I am lost in surprise and admiration. Sometimes I endeavored to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of his creator's form, but on this point he was impenetrable. "Are you mad, my friend?" he said. "Or whither does your senseless curiosity lead you? Would you also create for yourself and the world a demoniacal enemy? Peace, peace, learn my miseries, and do not seek to increase your own." Frankenstein discovered that I made notes concerning his history. He asked to see them, and then himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversations he held with his enemy. "Since you have preserved my narration," he said, "I would not that I mutilated one should go down to posterity." Thus has a week passed, while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever imagination formed. My thoughts and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest for my guest, which this tale and his own elevated and gentle manners have created. I wish to soothe him, yet can I counsel one so infinitely miserable, so destitute of every hope of consolation to live? Oh no, the only joy that he can now know will be when he composes his shattered spirit to peace and death. Yet he enjoys one comfort, the offspring of solitude and delirium. He believes that when in dreams he holds converse with his friends, and derives from that communion consolation for his miseries, or excitements to his vengeance, that they are not the creations of his fancy, but the beings themselves who visit him from the regions of a remote world. This faith gives a solemnity to his reveries that render them to me almost as imposing and interesting as truth. Our conversations are not always confined to his own history and misfortunes. On every point of general literature he displays unbounded knowledge and a quick and piercing apprehension. His eloquence is forcible and touching, nor can I hear him when he relates a pathetic incident or endeavors to move the passions of pity or love with tears. What a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity, when he is thus noble and godlike in ruin. he seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. "When younger," said he, "I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possessed a coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievements. This sentiment of worth of my nature supported me when others would have been oppressed, for I deemed it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents that might be useful to my fellow creatures. When I reflected on my work, I had completed no less a one than the creation of a sensitive and rational animal. I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors, but this thought, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me lower in the dust. All my speculations and hopes are as nothing, and, like the archangel who aspired the omnipotence, I chained an eternal hell. An imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application were intense. By the union of these qualities I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Even now I cannot recollect, without passion, my reveries while the work was incomplete. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my infancy I was endued with high hopes and a lofty ambition. But how am I sunk? Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I once was, you would not recognize me in this state of degradation. Despondency rarely visited my heart. A high destiny seemed to bear me on, until I fell, never again to rise. Must I then lose this miserable, admirable being? I have longed for a friend. I have sought one who would sympathize with a love and love me. Behold, on these desert seas, I have found such a one, but I fear I have gained him only to know his value and lose him. I would reconcile him to life, but he repulses the idea. I thank you, Walton, he said, for your kind intention towards so miserable a wretch, but when you speak of new ties and fresh affections, think you that any can replace those who are gone? Can any man be to me as Clerval was, or any woman another Elizabeth, even where the affections are not strongly moved by any superior excellence? The companions of my childhood always possess a certain power over our mind which hardly any latter friend can obtain. They know our infinite dispositions, which, however they may be afterwards modified, are never eradicated, and they can judge of our actions with more certain conclusions as to the integrity of our motives. A sister or a brother can never, unless indeed such symptoms have been shown early, suspect the other of fraud or false dealing, when another friend, however strongly he may be attached, may, in spite of himself, be contemplated with suspicion. But I enjoyed friends, dear not only through habit and association, but from their own merits, and wherever I am, soothing voice of my Elizabeth and the conversation of Clerval will be whispered in my ear. They are dead, and but one feeling in such a solitude can persuade me to persevere my life. If I were engaged in any high undertaking or design, fraught with extensive utility to my fellow creatures, then could I live to fulfill it. But such is not my destiny. I must pursue and destroy the being to whom I gave existence. Then my lot on earth will be fulfilled, and I may die. September 2nd. My beloved sister, I write to you, encompassed by peril and ignorant whether I am ever doomed to see again dear England and the dear friends that inhabit it. I am surrounded by mountains of ice, which admit of no escape and threaten every moment to crush my vessel. The brave fellows whom I have persuaded to be my companions look towards me for aid, but I have none to bestow. There is something terribly appalling in our situation, yet my courage and hopes do not desert me. Yet it is terrible to reflect that the lives of all these men are endangered through me. If we are lost, my mad schemes are the cause. And what, Margaret, will be the state of your mind? You will not hear of my destruction, and you will anxiously await my return. Years will pass, and you will have visitings of despair, and yet be tortured by hope. Oh, my beloved sister, the sickening feeling of your heartfelt expectations is, in prospect, more terrible to me than my own death. But you have a husband and lovely children. You may be happy, heaven bless you, and make you so. My unfortunate guest regards me with the tenderest compassion. He endeavors to fill me with hope and talks as if life were a possession which he valued. He reminds me how often the same accidents have happened to other navigators who have attempted this sea, and in spite of myself, he fills me with cheerful auguries. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence. When he speaks, they no longer despair. He arouses their energies, and while they hear his voice, they believe these vast mountains of ice are molehills, which will vanish before the resolutions of man. These feelings are transitory. Each day of expectation delayed fills them with fear, and I almost dread a mutiny caused by this despair. September 5th. A scene has just passed of such uncommon interest that although it is highly probable that these papers may never reach you, yet I cannot forbear recording it. We are still surrounded by mountains of ice, still in imminent danger of being crushed in their conflict. The cold is excessive, and many of my unfortunate comrades have already found a grave amidst this scene of desolation. Frankenstein has daily declined in health. A feverish fire still glimmers in his eyes, but he is exhausted, and when suddenly roused to an exertion, he speedily sinks again into apparent lifelessness. I mention in my last letter the fears I entertained of a mutiny. This morning, as I sat watching the wan countenance of my friend, his eyes half closed and his limbs hanging listlessly, I was roused by half a dozen of the sailors, who demanded admission into the cabin. They entered, and their leader addressed me. He told me that he and his companions had been chosen by the other sailors to come in deputation to me, to make me a requisition which, in justice, I could not refuse. We were immured in ice and should probably never escape, but they feared that if, as was possible, the ice should dissipate and a free passage be opened, I shall be rash enough to continue my voyage and lead them into fresh dangers after they might happily have surmounted this. They insisted, therefore, that I should engage with the solemn promise that if the vessel should be freed, I would instantly direct my course southwards. This speech troubled me. I had not despaired, nor had I yet conceived the idea of returning if set free. Yet could I, in justice or even in possibility, refuse this demand? I hesitated before I answered, when Frankenstein, who had first been silent, and indeed appeared hardly to have force enough to attend, now roused himself. His eyes sparkled, and his cheeks flushed with momentary vigor. Turning towards the men, he said, "What do you mean? What do you demand of the captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because the way was smooth and placid as a southern sea, but because it was full of dangers and terror, because at every new incident your fortitude was to be called forth and your courage exhibited, because danger and death surrounded it, and these you were to brave and overcome. For this was it a glorious? For this was it an honorable undertaking? You were hereafter to be held as the benefactors of your species, your names adored, as belonging to the brave men who encountered death for honor and the benefit of mankind. And now behold, with the first imagination of danger, or, if you will, the first mighty and terrific trial of your courage, you shrink away, and are content to be handed down as men who had not strength enough to endure the cold and peril. And so, poor souls, they were chilly and returned to their warm firesides. Why, that requires not this preparation. Ye need not have come thus far and dragged your captain to the shame of a defeat, merely to prove yourselves cowards. Oh, be men, or be more than men. Be steady to your purposes and firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts may be. It is mutable and cannot withstand you, if you say that it shall not. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked on your brows. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered, and who know not what it is to turn their backs on the foe." He spoke this with a voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of lofty design and heroism, that can no wonder that these men were moved. They looked at one another and were unable to reply. I spoke. I told them to retire and consider of what had been said, that I would not lead them farther north if they strenuously desired the contrary, but that I hoped that, with reflection, their courage would return. They retired, and I turned towards my friend, but he was sunk in languor and almost deprived of life. How all this will terminate, I know not, but I had rather die than return shamefully, my purpose unfulfilled. Yet I fear such will be my fate. The men, unsupported by ideas of glory and honor, can never willingly continue to endure their present hardships. September 7th. The die is cast. I have consented to return, if we are not destroyed. Thus are my hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision. I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience. September 12th. It is past. I am returning to England. I have lost my hopes of utility and glory. I have lost my friend. But I will endeavor to detail these bitter circumstances to you, my dear sister, and while I am wafted towards England and towards you, I will not despond. September 9th. The ice began to move. The roarings like thunder were heard at a distance as the island split and cracked in every direction. We were in the most imminent peril, but as we could only remain passive, my chief attention was occupied by my unfortunate guest, whose illness increased in such a degree that he was entirely confined to his bed. The ice cracked behind us and was driven with force towards the sea. A breeze sprung from the west, and on the 11th the passage towards the south became perfectly free. When the sailors saw this, and that their return to their native country was apparently assured, a shout of tumultuous joy broke from them, loud and long continued. Frankenstein, who was dozing, awoke and asked the cause of the tumult. "They shout," I said, "because they will soon return to England." "Do you then really return?" "Alas, yes. I cannot withstand their demands. I cannot lead them unwillingly to danger, and I must return." "Do so if you will, but I will not." "You may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with a sufficient strength." Saying this, he endeavored to spring from bed, but the exertion was too great for him. He fell back and fainted. It was long before he was destroyed, and I often thought that life was entirely extinct. At length he opened his eyes and breathed with difficulty, and was unable to speak. The surgeon gave him a composing draught and ordered us to leave him undisturbed. In the meantime, he told me that my friend had certainly not many hours to live. His sentence was pronounced, and I could only grieve and be patient. I sat by his bed watching him. His eyes were closed, and I thought that he slept. Presently he called to me in a feeble voice, and bidding me come near, said, "Alas, the strength I relied on is gone. I feel that I shall not die, and he, my enemy, the persecutor, may still be in my being. Think not, Walton, that in the last moments of my existence I feel the burning of hatred, an ardent desire of revenge I once expressed, but I feel myself justified in desiring in the death of my adversary. During these last days I have been occupied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable. In a fit of enthusiastic madness I created a rational creature, and was bound towards him to assure, as far as I was in my power, his happiness and well-being. This was my duty, but there was another still paramount to that. My duties toward the beings of my own species had greater claims to my attention, because they included a greater proportion of happiness and misery. Urged by this view, I refused, and I did right in refusing, to create a companion for the first creature. He showed unparalleled malignity and selfishness and evil. He destroyed my friends. He devoted to this destruction beings who possessed exquisite sensations, happiness, and wisdom. Nor do I know where this thirst of vengeance may end. Miserable himself, that he may render no other wretch, he ought to die. The task of his destruction was mine, but I have failed. When actuated by selfishness and vicious motives, I asked you to undertake my unfinished work, and I renew this request now, when I am only induced by reason and virtue." So on that note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our very first break. On this break, we have Mr. Jeff Hilliard from the Los Angeles area. He is going to be singing Finger Bang Your Day, Consensual Sex Fan, Silicone Wave, and Abandoned. And then we have Cockroach from the UK with We Play House. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
When your life is a never-ending train wreck, and you feel like you're drowning in a sea of regret, with a bit of oppression pressing down on your neck, it hurts so bad. When your overwhelming hatred kills your heart's desire, and reality starts looking like a dumpster fire, you start bitching to me, but you're preaching to the choir. You don't need to be so mad. 'Cause sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're sure there's no reason to try. When the whole world goes completely insane, open your heart, stand up and sing. I'm gonna finger bang my day. Yeah, yeah, I'll finger bang my day. That's right. You gotta make the choice to give it all you've got, and make your day long with pleasure, really make it hot. Because your day deserves a lover that pulls out the stops. Come on, it's not so hard. 'Cause sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're sure there's no reason to try. When the whole world blows up in our face, what else could we do but stand up and sing? I'm gonna finger bang my day. Yeah, yeah, finger bang my day.
Hey, what are we really doing? We can't live in a world that has this much hate. We have to get honest with ourselves. We have to take stock in what our part is in all of this madness. We have to let go, and we focus on giving love, setting that intention. And each and every single one of us gets up every day with the intention to give love. And we do it. We go out there and we give love every single day. Each one of us gets out there and makes love to our day, giving our day a multiple orgasm. The whole world will be orgasmic for the rest of eternity.
Sometimes we hurt, sometimes we cry, sometimes we're sure there's no reason to try. When the whole world is fucking insane, we open our hearts, stand up and sing. I'm gonna finger bang my day. Finger bang my day. Finger bang my day. Let's open our hearts, stand up and sing. I'm gonna finger bang my day. Yeah, yeah, finger bang my day. Do you wanna go for a ride in my consensual sex van? Do you wanna go for a ride in my consensual sex van? Let me take you far away from all this huff and puff. There will be nothing in between our love, like a pair of doves flying high above, where nothing can touch us.
let's go. Just get in the van.
I just got a package, I can't wait to get home. I spent all day tracking the shipment on my phone, all that she was lacking. I ordered custom, I can't wait to get some. Take it to the bedroom, bitch is always nagging. Now I got the air, I say this bitch is packing, going my way. I have a new attraction, don't care what you say, it's better in every way. Now baby it's time to play, we're gonna make us a tape and show everyone the way. Cause I'm going my way, riding up the Silicon Way. I wanna see on the game with my new real dog, I'm gonna play. Just second way to my Silicon Way. She is here to stay, she's my new real dog and it's time to play. She don't need expensive date nights, never talks back, I'm always right. Stuff it in her face with all my might. She don't even care, we don't ever fight. She never cries when I'm testing the suspension. We blow it up like it's fucking Armageddon. We make the videos because this is perfection. Look at this erection, I don't need protection. Cause I'm going my way, riding up the Silicon Way. I wanna see on the game with my new real dog, I'm gonna play. Just second way to my Silicon Way. She is here to stay, she's my new real dog and it's time to play. With my new real dog, I'm gonna play. She's my new real dog and it's time to play.
The woman of my dreams.
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi?
Fais-moi l'amour.
Je suis amoureux.
Je pense toujours à
Enchanté,
tu es charmant.
ma chérie. Mon
Tu es
frère nasty.
Tu
Ils étaient le nipple.
es charmant. Fais-moi l'amour.
Like living on a super yacht, making love to a robot. It's like owning a football team, but having sex with a robot. It's like winning an Oscar and Emmy or Grammy when you're fucking a robot. It's like saving a family with a newborn from a fire, but you're fucking a robot. I'm going my way, riding up the Silicon Way. I wanna see on the game with my new real dog, I'm gonna play. Just second way to my Silicon Way. She is here to stay, she's my new real dog and it's time to play. Left here alone, just a shadow of my erection on the wall. Why won't you answer my calls? I gave you my all with the love we made together. Oh
We played house. We played house. We played house. We played house.
Welcome back to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. On that break, we had Mr. Jeff Hilliard from the Los Angeles area, and then in the very end, we had Mr. Cockroach from the UK. Hope you guys enjoyed that. This soundtrack that we're using for the background this evening is The House. So let us know which one is your favorite this evening as we are finishing up Frankenstein. And then we are going to follow up with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yet I cannot ask you to renounce your country and friends to fulfill this task, and now that you are returning to England, you will have little chance of meeting with him. But the consideration of these points and the well-balancing of what you may esteem your duties, I leave to you. My judgment and ideas are already disturbed by the near approach of death. I dare not ask you to do what I think right, for I may still be misled by passion. That he should live to be an instrument of mischief disturbs me. In other respects, this hour, when I momentarily expect my release, is the only happy one which I have enjoyed for several years. The forms of the beloved dead flit before me, and I hasten to their arms. Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness and tranquility, and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet why do I say this? I have myself been blessed in these hopes, yet another may succeed. His voice became faint as he spoke, and at length, exhausted by his effort, he sunk into silence. About half an hour afterwards, he attempted again to speak, but was unable. He pressed my hand feebly, and his eyes closed forever, while the irradiation of a gentle smile passed away from his lips. Margaret, what comment can I make on the untimely extinction of this glorious spirit? What can I say that will enable you to understand the depth of my sorrow? All that I should express would be inadequate and feeble. My tears flow, my mind is overshadowed by a cloud of disappointment, but I journey towards England, and I may there find consolation. I am interrupted. What do these sounds portend? It is midnight. The breeze blows fairly, and the watch on deck scarcely stir. Again there is a sound as if of a human voice, but hoarser. It comes from the cabin where the remains of Frankenstein still lie. I must arise and examine. Good night, my sister. Great God, what a scene has just taken place! I am yet dizzy with the remembrance of it. I hardly know whether I shall have the power to detail it, yet the tale which I have recorded would be incomplete without this final and wonderful catastrophe. I entered the cabin where lay the remains of my ill-fated and admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find words to describe. Gigantic in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions. As he hung over the coffin, his face was concealed by long locks of ragged hair, but one vast hand was extended, in color and apparent texture like that of a mummy. When he heard the sound of my approach, he ceased to utter the exclamations of grief and horror, and sprung towards the window. Never did I behold a vision so horrible as his face, of such loathsome yet appalling hideousness. I shut my eyes involuntarily, and endeavored to recollect what were my duties with regard to this destroyer. I called on him to stay. He paused, looked on me with wonder, and again turned towards the lifeless form of his creator. He seemed to forget my presence, and every feature and gesture seemed instigated by the wildest rage of some uncontrollable passion. "That is also my victim," he exclaimed. "In his murder my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. O Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovedst. Alas, he is cold, he cannot answer me." His voice seemed suffocated, and my first impulses, which had suggested to me the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend in destroying his enemy, were now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. I approached this tremendous being. I dared not again raise my eyes to his face. There was something so scarring and unearthly in his ugliness. I attempted to speak, but the words died away on my lips. The monster continued to utter wild and incoherent self-reproaches. At length I gathered resolution to address him in a pause of the tempest of his passion. "Your repentance," I said, "is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the stings of remorse before you had urged your diabolical vengeance to this extremity, Frankenstein would yet have lived." "And do you dream," said the demon, Do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He continued, pointed to the corpse. He suffered not in the consummation of the deed, oh, not the 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of its execution. The frightful selfishness hurried me on, while my heart was poisoned with remorse. Think you that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and when wretched by misery, device, and hatred, it did not endure the violence of the change without tortures such as you cannot even imagine. After the murder of Clerval, I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself. But when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings and passions, from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recollected my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master, of an impulse which I detested, yet could not disobey. Yet when she died, nay, then I was not miserable. I had cast off all feeling, subdued all anguish, to riot in the excess of my despair. Evil thenceforth became my good. Urged thus far, I had no choice but to adapt my nature to an element which I had willingly chosen. The completion of a demoniacal design became an insatiable passion, and now it is ended. There is my last victim. I was at first touched by the expressions of his misery, yet when I recalled to my friend in my mind what Frankenstein had said of his powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when again cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, indignation was rekindled within me. "Wretch," I said, "it is well that you come here to whine over the desolation that you have made. You throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and when they are consumed you sit among the ruins and lament the fall. Hypocritical fiend! If he whom you mourn still lived, still would he be the object again. Would he become the prey of your accursed vengeance? It is not pity that you feel. You lament only because the victim of your malignity is withdrawn from your power." "Oh, it is not thus, interrupted the being. "Yet such must be the impression conveyed to you by what appears to be the purport of my actions. Yet I seek not to fellow feeling in my misery. No sympathy may I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection, with which my whole being overflowed, that I wished to be participated. But now, that virtue has become to me a shadow, and that happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair. In what should I seek your sympathy? I am content to suffer alone, while my suffering shall endure when I die. I am well satisfied that abhorrence and opprobrium should load my memory. Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue, of fame, and of enjoyment. Once I falsely hoped to meet the beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. I was nourished with high thoughts of honor and devotion, but now crime was degraded me beneath the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creatures whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of beauty and the majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even that enemy of God and man had fiends, friends, and associates in his desolation. I am alone. You, who call Frankenstein your friend, seemed to have a knowledge of my crimes and his misfortunes, but in the detail which he gave you of them, he could not sum up the hours and months of misery which I endured, wasting in impotent passions, for while I destroyed his hopes, I did not satisfy my own desires. They were forever ardent and craving. Still I desired love and fellowship, and I was still spurned. Was there no justice in this? Am I to be thought the only criminal when all humankind sinned against me? Why do you not hate Felix, who drove his friend from the door with contumely? Why do you not execrate the rustic who sought to destroy the Saviour of his child? Nay, these are virtuous and immaculate beings. I, the miserable and the abandoned, am the aberration, to be spurned at, and kicked, and trampled on. Even now my blood boils at the recollection of this injustice. But it is true that I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grasped to death his throat, who never injured me or any other living thing. I have devoted my Creator, the select specimen of all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I have pursued him even to that irremediable ruin. There he lies, white and cold in death. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes, when that imagination will haunt my thoughts no more. Fear not that I shall not be the instrument of future mischief. My work is nearly complete. Neither yours nor any man's death is needed to consummate the series of my being, and accomplish that which must be done, but it requires my own. Do not think that I shall be slow to perform this sacrifice. I shall quit your vessel on the ice raft which brought me thither, and shall seek the most northern extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious and unhallowed wretch who would create such another as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer be unquenched. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me, or be the prey of feelings unsatisfied, yet unquenched. He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun or stars, or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feeling, and sense will pass away, and in this condition must I find my happiness. Some years ago, when the images of summer, and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die. Now it is my consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death? Farewell, I leave you, and end you, the last of humankind, whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive and yet cherished a desire of vengeance against me, I would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness. And if yet, in some mode unknown to me, thou hast not ceased to think and feel, thou wouldst not desire me a vengeance greater than that which I feel. Blasted as thou wert, my agony was still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse will not cease to rankle in my wounds until death shall close them forever. But soon, he cried, with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what now felt be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly, and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea of my winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell. He sprung from the cabin window as he said this, upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. The end. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. To Catherine de Matos. It's ill to lose the bands that God decreed to bind. Still will we be the children of the heather and the wind. Far away from home, oh, it's still for you and me, but the brim of blowing bonny on the north country. Chapter 1. Story of the Door. Mr. Utterson the lawyer was a man of rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile. Cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse, backward in sentiment, lean long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beaconed from his eye. Something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in these silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the acts of his life. He was austere with himself, drank gin when he was alone, to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the doors of one for 20 years, but he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering, almost with envy, at the high pressure of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in any extremity inclined to help rather than to reprove. I incline to Cain's heresy, he used to say quaintly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In this character, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of downgoing men. And to such as these, so long as they came about his chambers, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanor. In doubt, the feat was easy to Mr. Utterson, for he was undemonstrative at the best, and even his friendship seemed to be founded in a similar catholicity of good nature. It is the mark of a modest man to accept his friendly circle ready-made from the hands of opportunity, and that was the lawyer's way. His friends were those of his own blood or those whom he had known longest. His affections, like ivy, were the growth of time. They implied no aptness in the object. Hence, no doubt, the bond that united him to Mr. Richard Enfield, his distant kinsman, the well-known man about town. It was a nut to crack for many. What these two could see in each other, or what subject they could find in common, it was reported by those who encountered them in their Sunday walks, that they said nothing, looking singularly dull, and would hail with obvious relief the appearance of a friend. For all that, the two men put the greatest store by this excursions, counted them chief jewel of each week. and not only set aside occasions of pleasure, but even resisted the calls of business, that they might enjoy them uninterrupted. It chanced on one of these rambles that their way led them down a by-street in the busy quarter of London. The street was small and what is called quiet, but it drove a thriving trade on the weekdays. The inhabitants were all doing well, it seemed, and all emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their gains in coquetry, so that the shop fronts stood along that thoroughfare with an air of invitation, like rows of smiling saleswomen. Even on Sunday, when it veiled its more florid charms and lay comparatively empty of passage, the street shone out in contrast to its dingy neighborhood, like a fire in a forest, and with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught the pleased the eye of the passenger. 2 doors from one corner, on the left hand going east, the line was broken by the entry of a court, and just at that point a certain sinister block of building thrust forward its gable on the street. It was 2 stories high, showed no window, nothing but a door on the lower story, and a blind forehead of discolored wall on the upper, and bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. Tramps slouched into recess and struck matches on the panels. Children kept shop upon the steps, and schoolboy had tried his knife on the mouldings. And for close on a generation, no one had appeared to drive away these random visitors to repair their ravages. Mr. Enfield and the lawyer were on the other side of the by-street, but when they came abreast of the entry, the former lifted up his cane and pointed. "Did you ever remark that door?" he asked, and when his companion had replied in the affirmative, "It is connected in mind," added he, "with a very odd story." "Indeed," said Mr. Utterson, with a slight change of voice, "and what was that?" "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, and my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps. Street after street, and all the folks asleep, street after street, all lighted up as if for a procession, and all as empty as a church, till at last I got into the state of mind when a man listens and begins to long for the sight of a policeman. All at once I saw 2 figures. One, a little man who was stumped along eastward at a good walk, and the other a girl of maybe 8 or 10 who was running as hard as she was able down the cross street. Well, sir, the 2 ran into one another naturally enough at the corner, and then came the horrible part of the thing, for the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It sounds nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man, it was like some damned juggernaut. I gave a view hollow, took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group about the screaming child. He was perfectly cool and made a resistance, but gave me one look so ugly that it brought the sweat on me like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor, for whom she had been spent, put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much the worse, more frightened according to the sawbones, and there you might have supposed would be an end to it. But there was one curious circumstance. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family, which was only natural. But the doctor's case was what struck me. He was the usual cut-and-dry apothecary, of no particular age and color, with a strong Edinburgh accent, and about as emotional as a bagpipe. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us. Every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw that Sawbones turned sick and white with the desire to kill him. I knew what was in his mind, just as he knew what was in mine, and killing being out of the question, we did the next best. We told the man we could and would make such a scandal out of this as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we undertook that he should lose them, and all the time as we were pitching it in red hot, we were keeping the woman off him as best we could, for they were as wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces, and there was the man in the middle, with a kind of black sneering coolness, frightened too, I could see that, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. If you choose to make capital out of this accident, he said, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene, says he. Name your figure. Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. He would have clearly licked to stick it out. But there was something about the lot of us that means mischief, and at last he struck. The next thing was to get the money. And where do you think he carried us but to that place with the door? Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with a matter of £10 in gold and a cheque for the balance of the quartz, drawn payable to bearer, and signed with a name that I can't mention, though it's one of the points of my story, but it was a name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that. Was only genuine. I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman that the whole business looked apocryphal, and that a man does not in real life walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out of it with another man's cheque for close upon £100. But he was quite easy in sneering. Set your minds at rest, says he. I will stay with you till the banks open and cash the cheque myself. So we all set off, the doctor, the child's father, and our friend, and myself, and passed the rest of the night in my chambers, and next day, when we had breakfasted, went in a body to the bank. I gave in the cheque myself, and said I had every reason to believe it was a forgery. Not a bit of it. The cheque was genuine. Tut, tut, said Mr. Utterson. I see you feel as I do, said Mr. Enfield. Yes, it's a bad story, for my man was a fellow that nobody could have to do with, a really damnable man, and the person that drew the cheque is very pink of the properties, celebrated too, and, what makes it worse, one of your fellows, who do what they call good, blackmail, I suppose, an honest man paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth. Blackmail House is what I call the place with the door in consequence, though even that, you know, is far from explaining all, he added, and with a few words fell into a vein of musing. From this was recalled by Mr. Utterson asking rather suddenly, and you don't know if the drawer of the cheque lives there? A likely place, isn't it? Returned Mr. Enfield. I happen to have noticed his address. He lives in some square or other. And you never asked about the place with the door? Said Mr. Utterson. No, sir. I had delicacy, was the reply. I feel very strongly about putting questions. It partakes too much of the style of the day of judgment. You start a question, and it's like starting a stone. You sit quietly on the top of a hill, and away the stone goes, starting others, and presently some bland old bird, the last you would have thought of, is knocked on the head in his own back garden, and the family have to change their name. No, sir, I make it a rule of mine. The more it looks like Queer Street, the less I ask. A very good rule, too, said the lawyer. But I have studied the place for myself, continued Mr. Enfield. It seems scarcely a house. There's no other door, and nobody goes in or out of that one, but once in a great while, the gentleman of my adventure. There are 3 windows looking at a great while. The gentleman On the court on the first floor, none below, the windows are always shut, but they're clean. And then there is a chimney, which is generally smoking, so somebody must live there. And yet it's not so sure, for the buildings are so packed together about that court that it's hard to say where one ends and another begins. The pair walked on again for a while in silence, and then, "Enfield," said Mr. Utterson, "that's a good rule of yours." "Yes, I think it is," said Enfield. "But for all that," continued the lawyer, "there's one point I want to ask. I want to ask the name of that man who walked over the child." "Well," said Mr. Enfield, "I can't see what harm it would do. There was a man of the name Hyde." "Him," said Mr. Utterson. "What sort of man is he to see?" "He is not easy to describe. There's something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarce know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He's an extraordinary-looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir, I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him, and it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment." Mr. Utterson again walked some way in silence, and obviously under a weight of consideration. "You are sure he used a key?" he inquired at last. "My dear sir," began Enfield, surprised out of himself. "Yes, I know," said Utterson. "I know it must seem strange. The fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, it is because I know it already. You see, Richard, your tale has gone home. If you have been exact or inexact in any point, you had better correct it." "I think you might have warned me," returned the other, with a touch of sullenness. "But I have been pedantically exact, as you call it. The fellow had a key, and what's more, he has it still. I saw him use it not a week ago." Mr. Utterson sighed deeply, said never a word, and the young man presently resumed. "Here is another lesson to say nothing," said he. "I am ashamed of my long tongue. Let us make a bargain never to refer to this again." "With all my heart," said the lawyer. "I shake hands on that, Richard." Chapter 2. Search for Mr. Hyde. That evening Mr. Utterson came home to his bachelor house in sombre spirits, and sat down to dinner without relish. It was his custom on a Sunday, when his meal was over, to sit close by the fire, a volume of some dry divinity on his reading desk, until the clock of the neighboring church rang out the hour of 12, when he would soberly go and gratefully to bed. On this night, however, as soon as the cloth was taken away, he took up a candle and went into his business room. There he opened his safe, took from the most private part of it a document endorsed on the envelope as Dr. Jekyll's will, and sat down with a clouded brow to study its contents. The will was holograph, for Mr. Utterson, though he took charge of it now that it was made, had refused to lend the least assistance in making of it. It provided not only that, in case of the decease of Mr. Jekyll, M.D., D.C.L., LL.D., F.R.S., N.C., all his possessions were to pass into the hands of his friend and benefactor, Edward Hyde, but that in case of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance or unexplained absence for any period exceeding 3 calendar months, the said Edward Hyde would step into the said Henry Jekyll's shoes without further delay, and free from any burden or obligation beyond the payment of a few small sums to the members of the doctor's household. This document had long been the lawyer's eyesore. It offered him both as a lawyer and as a lover of the sane and customary sides of life. To whom the financial and fanciful was the immodest, and hitherto it was his ignorance of Mr. Hyde that had swelled his indignation. Now, by a sudden turn, it was his knowledge. It was already bad enough when the name was but a name of which he could learn no more. It was worse when it began to be clothed upon with detestable attributes, and out of the shifting, insubstantial mist that had so long baffled his eye, there leaped up the sudden definite presentation of a fiend. "I thought it was madness," he said, as he replaced the obnoxious paper in the safe, "and now I begin to fear it is disgrace." With that, he blew out his candle, put on a greatcoat, and set forth in the direction of the Cavendish Square, that citadel of medicine, where his friend the great Dr. Lanyon had his house and received his crowding patients. If anyone knows, it will be Lanyon, he had thought. The solemn butler knew and welcomed him. He was subjected to no stage of delay, but ushered direct from the door to the dining room, where Dr. Lanyon sat alone over his wine. This was a hearty, healthy, dapper, red-faced gentleman with a lawn over, a shock of hair prematurely white, and a boisterous and decided manner. At sight of Mr. Utterson, he sprang up from his chair and welcomed him with both hands. The geniality, as was the way of the man, was somewhat theatrical to the eye, but it was reposed on genuine feeling, for these two were old friends, old mates, both at school and college, both thorough respecters of themselves and of each other, and, what does not always follow, men who thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. After a little rambling talk, the lawyer led up to the subject which so disagreeably preoccupied his mind. "I suppose, Lanyon," he said, "you and I must be the two oldest friends that Henry Jekyll has." "I wish the friends were younger," chuckled Dr. Lanyon, "but I suppose we are, and what of that? I see little of him now." "Indeed," said Utterson, "I thought you had a bond of common interests." "We had," was his reply, "but it is more than 10 years since Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He began to go wrong in mind, and though, of course, I continue to take an interest in him, for old sake's sake, as they say, I see I have seen devilish little of the man. Such unscientific balderdash," added the doctor, flushing suddenly purple, "would have estranged Damon and Pythias." This little spirit of temper was somewhat of a relief to Mr. Utterson. They have only differed on some point of science, he thought, and being a man of no scientific passions, except in the matter of conveyancing, he even added, "It is nothing worse than that." He gave his friend a few seconds to recover his composure, and then approached the question he had come to put. "Did you ever come across a protege of his, one Hyde?" he asked. "Hyde?" repeated Lanyon. "No, never heard of him, since my time." That was the amount of information that the lawyer carried back with him to the great dark bed on which he tossed to and fro until the small hours of the morning began to grow large. It was a night of little ease to his toiling mind, toiling in mere darkness, and besieged by questions. 6 o'clock struck. Actually, I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to put my little bookmark right here. So we're going to begin again, chapter 2. At 6 o'clock struck the bells of the church. So yeah, that's the beginning of our new book. It's actually known as a novella, and I believe it was late 1800s that this book was written by a great Scottishman. His name is Robert Louis Stevenson. He lived 1850 to 1894, was born and educated in Edinburgh, Scotland. Despite a lifetime of ill health, he was a prolific writer of fiction, essays, and poetry. His first published work appeared in student magazines while he was at university. Apart from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, His best known work today is the adventure classic Treasure Island. So on that note, boys and girls, we are going to go to our second music break. On this break, we have Miss Mia Savage with Antidote for Savages singing Lemurian Crypto. Then we're back to Mr. Jeff Hilliard from the Los Angeles area with Coconut Hills, Multitude, and Good Life. And then we'll end that music break with Cockroach from the UK with I See You. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
desperate and pathetic. Nothing but a coward. You're a fool with nothing to offer. No one will ever believe you. They see you for what you are. You're just a fraud, a shell of a person. And now the marvelous fear to penetrate the demon. They love you. They enslave you into the depths of the place. I am the son of a...
I got Marlon moves, got that molar too. You think it's wrong? I could've had too long. Fuck that. Check these molar moves. You need a molar too. I can do no wrong. Back of the head long, never gonna cut it.
All these hookers sweet on me. Look at them chasing me, showing me that ass. And I bag up snatch. I do this shit for free. Go down your mama till 3. She's taking selfies with the mullet like it's history. I can outmaneuver you with that pussy, dude.
You sit like Buddha waiting on it to come to you. My lines are straight to the point, she shows me gratitude. So what's your latitude? Let's adjust your attitude. Health with a alligator, double dually Lamborghini. All up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini.
I got more than moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong, back of the head too long, fuck that.
Health with a alligator, double dually Lamborghini. All up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini.
Check these molar moves, you need a molar too. I can do no wrong, back of the head, I'm gonna cut it.
Alligator, double dually Lamborghini. All up in a silly little yellow polka dot bikini. You're like the butt of a butter knife cutting up panini. So climb back in your kangaroo pouch like a rolling genie. These moves are hot, these locks I got. This power cannot be disputed and it can't be boxed. So you can find me in the studio with all these thoughts. You wanna bite my style, but you can't be what you're not, neighbor.
I got more than moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong, back of the head too long, fuck that. Check these molar moves, you need a molar too. I can do no wrong, back of the head, I'm gonna cut it. Got that motherfucking ballin'. You wanna touch it?
Yeah. Next time you come around here with your bitch ass, just remember how my mullet makes your hoes pussy drip, drip, drip.
I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong, back of the head too long, fuck that. Check these molar moves, you need a molar too. I can do no wrong, never gonna cut it. I got molar moves, I got that molar too. You think it's wrong, back of the head too long, fuck that. Check these molar moves, you need a molar too. I can do no wrong, back of the head, never gonna cut it. Never gonna cut it. Never gonna cut it.
Drip, drip,
Molar moves.
some molar, bitch.
Molar moves.
Drip, drip.
Molar moves. Never gonna cut it.
Excuse me! Excuse me! You got a cigarette? Hey, you help a guy out with some spare change. Anything will do, man. Oh, God bless you. Can I just get your change? I missed the bus. I got these 6 right there. I'm not an animal! Moving like a steak knife. This is the good life. Dancing in the moonlight. I wanna be inside of you. We got plenty to do till the 1:45. And I know you wanna ride my Cadillac. Don't give me no flack, I'll put you flat on your back.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. So this evening, we finished reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then we began The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Mr. Robert Louis Stevenson. For the last hour of our show, we shall be partaking in Reddit Ghost Stories. So this story is by u/physical_basis702. Summer of 2022. And this story is called Ghost in the Bathroom at Army Barracks. So it was the summer of 2022. I am a cadet, and we had to stay at this old Army base. Can't give the location due to privacy reasons, but it was about 1 week in. One night, I had to pee really bad, and basically, my dorm was at the very bottom of this long hall. As I entered the toilet, I began to feel very uncomfortable, like somebody was watching me. I went into the nearest stall and did my business. Went over to the sink to wash my hands. I heeded a door slam at the other side of the toilets, but I brushed it off as one of my fellow cadets. But then the stall I was just in, slammed shut, and my heart was in my throat. There was no way that it could have been a gust of wind, because it was relatively warm. I've never shared this story up until now. Nothing can explain that night. This one is by u/Eli_Z53. Haunted bathroom? I'm gonna start this off with a little backstory. My grandfather died during the building of my current house. He and my grandmother had just gotten the land and started to build on it. This land has been in my family since they moved from Holland to Canada in the early 1900s. The wall across from the bathroom door is covered in windows. This is relevant later. The upstairs bathroom is the most active place in the whole house. The door handle starts to turn or jiggle on its own when I'm the only one here. It just did it as I was writing this. The mirror is a sort of cupboard thing, and the mirror keeps opening to create a vortex with the hallway mirror. I've literally started taping the mirror shut with duct tape, and it still opens without fail, and random fingerprints show up on the mirror outside of my bathroom. The mirror is now relevant. I don't know if it's just coincidences or if it's actually haunted, but I want to get a second opinion. This one is by u/Forkobini. The creepy face on the door. I'm a 19-year-old, currently doing my first year in an arts school in Singapore. Before attending this school, I have heard a lot of stories about this school, like students hearing soldiers marching in the building at 9 p.m., women crying in the toilets, and people running in the school building even though it's already midnight. However, I always thought of a realistic explanation in these stories. Come on, it's an art school. Those marching could be the dance students. Crying in the toilet is common because of the stress students get from the assignments and running at midnight. I did that a few times to run away from the guards because I couldn't use my own laptop to do my assignments, so I stayed in the school's computer labs to do them. But on 18th November 2022, something horrifying happened that changed my mind. It was a Friday night, and there weren't a lot of students in the building. My school is located at the heart of the busiest location in Singapore. Clubs and bars were nearby. We're surrounded by hotels and we're pretty much surrounded by iconic places and malls. So most students are out to party, especially because it was the last day of the semester. I was in my classroom alone doing my assignments. I was having a bad day, and I did not bother going to the cafe or just going home to do my work because I really needed to smoke from time to time. I wasn't smoking cigarettes, of course. My classroom could have detected that, but I always bring a vape with me to smoke it while I'm alone in class. Living in a stink country and home, I am not allowed to vape at all, hence why I'm doing my assignments in the classroom. I looked at the time, and it was already 10:30 p.m. I was surprised the guards didn't even bother going up to check if students left the property already. I debated if I should stay or leave later and catch the last train. I stayed somehow and continued doing my essay. A while later, I heard someone trying to open the door. The door isn't locked or anything. It can only be opened with the staff and students' ID cards. I looked at the glass panel of the door, and I didn't see anyone. I opened the door. No one was there. It's impossible for someone to run and hide. It takes quite a while to find a place to hide because it's an open space. At that point, I was still not creeped out as I was stressed with the assignments. It happened again, but this time, I saw a creepy face in the panel looking straight at me. Its eyes were wide open, a huge grin on its face, and the rest of the face was just pitch black. I froze, not knowing if I should look away, but at this point, this thing knew I could see it. I reached for my phone slowly while looking at it, not blinking at all. It watched my movements intensely. The door handle shook again, and I have never been so thankful of the card function for the door. I quickly called my boyfriend, who was at the gig nearby, and frantically asked him to come to my school and fetch me. This thing wouldn't go away, and at this point I keep asking myself if that was human with a mask, but its features move naturally. My boyfriend FaceTimed me this time, and I looked at the screen to look at where he was at. I looked up again, and the face wasn't there anymore. I looked at the screen, and I could see my boyfriend reaching the classroom. The door shook again, but this time it's my boyfriend. I opened the door and hugged him. I was shaking so bad, and the whole time we hugged, he calmed me down and told me he didn't see anything, so we're safe now. We packed my bag and immediately left the building. We have this belief where if a ghost or spirit shows itself to you, you are not allowed to go home immediately as it will follow you. Instead of catching the last train, my boyfriend and I decided to sit at a nearby coffee shop and eat supper. Though it happened recently, I don't know what that was, and I'm never staying in the classroom late at night alone. This one is by you/your mom 769I. I think my apartment is haunted. So we moved into my apartment in 2018-2019. It didn't start immediately, it started randomly. Little things like stuff moving to different places and feeling like something was watching me. One day last year, me and my sister were watching YouTube, and it randomly changed to Hulu. The remote was on the table. We changed it back to YouTube and went back to Hulu again. We were spooked, so we decided to play a game. While we were playing, we heard a step in my sister's room. We were home alone. We were scared, but I got up and went in my sister's room and saw a shadow figure in the corner of my eye. We were pretty spooked, but nothing happened after that besides tiny stuff. Fast forward to yesterday. I had a friend over, and me and my friend love watching ghost stories. We were playing Just Dance, and we heard something fall in the kitchen. We went to investigate, and we saw a lid fell. Didn't really make sense because it was on the counter before we were in there, so we just went back to playing Just Dance. I have to be alone at home today, and honestly, I don't know what to do. Update: my friend left and nothing really happened until 11 p.m. I saw a shadow figure in the corner of my eye, and my dog started to bark in that direction for 15 minutes. This one is by u/pop_I64. The ghost of a dead student is haunting my school. For context, there was this kid who I'll call Nicholas, who went to my school in 2018. One morning, Nicholas didn't go to school, which was really out of the ordinary for him. Later in the day, news spread that Nicholas had been murdered by his mom in a murder-suicide. His death was all over the news and really hurt our town as he was relatively liked by everyone. Now, to the story, he haunts the school now. He doesn't seem to be very aggressive as a spirit, but he's definitely still present. In the cafeteria bathroom, every time anyone goes in there, they feel like somebody's watching them. One day, when I walked into the cafeteria bathroom, the faucet randomly turned on, which can't happen on accident since the faucets require pressure to turn on. Then, in the ESL room, he tends to knock things over. The ESL room is in the orchestra room, and since I'm in orchestra, I get to know the goings-on of the ESL class. Frequently, things fall off shelves for no apparent reason. In orchestra, I play the double bass, which means I have to put my bass in the closet every time I'm not playing it to keep it safe. Every time I'm there with the lights off, I see some shadowy figure looking at the violas with green bands. For context, again, after he died, there was an orchestra ceremony for his passing. And all of the instruments had green bands since they were his favorite color. That's all the main stories I have. He's rather reserved, but still, definitely present. This one is by Hello Kitty 199821. My 2-year-old daughter talked to my grandmother who had passed away in 2020. Friday, 18/2020. I am a mom of 3 children. My oldest is 2 years old, and my other daughter is 1 year old, and the youngest is my son, 6 months old. Well, today I'd gotten a video chat from her dad, and he had told me some things that I am surprised that my 2-year-old knew. Please note, me and my kid's dad are not religious. Well, my kid's dad had video chatted with me and asked if anyone had told her about the Bible or anything like that. I said no to that, and my kid's dad had asked my daughter, "Where did you learn that?" My daughter responded to him and said, "Grandma told me that." After she responded to him, he then asked her, "Which grandma?" She replied to his question and said, "Mommy's grandma." After hearing her say that, I had her dad show her a picture of my grandparents that had passed away, and as soon as she saw the picture, she said, "That's Grandma and Granddad." My grandfather had passed away in 2013, and my grandmother had passed away in 2020. My daughter was born a few months after she died. My grandmother had gotten to meet my daughter when she was just a month old. When she passed away, it was during COVID. Me and her dad never explained to her who they were yet. Me and her dad were waiting for the kids to get older and then tell them. It's scary how she knew who they were and what she knew about some stuff about the Bible. Lily is the 2-year-old, Kasha the 1-year-old, and Indra the 6-month-old. This one is by U/Love and Happiness 96. The Bald Man. My parents used to stay in a townhome about 5 years ago, which in the 80s they were home to only the old people. So after everybody passed or sold their townhome, they just turned them into apartments, 1 through 4 bedrooms, 1 to 3.5 bathrooms. They were pretty big, but they barely updated them, and the rent was from $800 to $1,500. They had a lot of deaths there in the 80s, mostly from people dying of natural causes, which didn't bother my parents because my dad doesn't believe in ghosts, and my mom isn't really scared of anything. One day, I took my daughter over to visit my parents. I came in and took a nap. My daughter played downstairs. My mom went to use the bathroom, and my daughter came busting into the bathroom telling my mom a bald-headed man just went out to the patio with a white stick in his mouth, aka a cigarette. So they checked the patio and they found nothing, and all the doors were locked. We just assumed that she made it up, but my daughter kept talking about the bald man. He wore a white shirt and blue jeans. So finally, when they were moving out, my mom went to turn in her keys, and she was telling the landlord about what my daughter had seen, and she tells my mom that it was a man and a woman who stayed there. Their troubled grown son moved in with them, and after they both died, he stayed there for maybe a month, and finally ended up killing himself in the apartment. She said everyone thought he killed himself because he was so used to his parents doing everything for him, and he couldn't function without them. This one is by U/Miles_Prow3R. This isn't my story, but my brother's. Back in late January 2022, my dad died in his house, so we all kind of moved back to our mother's house. Everyone left except for my oldest brother, Jonathan. He had decided to stay there until he couldn't anymore. For context, we had a ghost in there before Dad had died called George. After my dad's funeral, Jonathan was calling my aunt to talk to her. Then she asked if my younger sister was there. He asked why, then my aunt told him she had heard a young girl's voice that slowly turned into an old man's voice. She also heard my dad's voice, so that was neat. After this, my aunt found the real name of the ghost. Then Jonathan said on the way in the house, "This is where all the creepy stuff started happening." After this time, anytime he turned on the kitchen light, he would hear loud footprints banging up the basement stairs. At one point, he heard things in the wall and in the ceiling just banging loud. Once, when he was sleeping, he heard loud banging on his bedroom window. He went out there the next day just to see a pair of footprints emerge out of thin air, then just disappear. My aunt at some point gave Jonathan a rock light that was supposed to help with the paranormal stuff. It worked, it's just he felt something was watching him constantly in the nights of the month he left. He would also hear banging on the cars like it was trying to lure him out of the house. He left in April, not due to the ghost, but due to the house being put up for rent again. It's safe to say Jonathan accidentally passed off that ghost. This one is by you/Omastorm. Seeing my grandmother when she passed away. I was about 5 to 6 years old, so about 1 to 2. My paternal grandmother was a sweet woman in her older years, from what I can remember of her, though it's very little. A little background: my grandmother had many illnesses as she grew older, and my mother was an RN at the time and was able to care for her whenever possible. The nursing facility my grandmother was in was fairly decent to my knowledge. Right around the time I saw her still alive, something felt different to me when I would visit her. I couldn't quite tell at that time, though. Now looking back at it as an adult, I'm fairly certain I could see her soul was slowly disconnecting from her earthly form. It was like looking at a doll. When I visited her for the first time, right about the time I had turned 6, I was sleeping in my mom's room because I was afraid of the dark. My grandpa was in the living room waiting for my mom to come home from work. Well, around 10 or 11, I feel someone touch my shoulder gently and wake me up. I sat up in bed and looked, utterly confused. The person standing next to the bed was my grandmother, wearing her favorite nightgown with little clouds and flowers all over it. She sat on the bed next to me with a gentle smile on her face. I remember this so vividly to this day. I asked her, "What are you doing here, Grandma? How'd you get past Grandpa?" She replied softly back, in what sounded like an echo to me at the time, "I'm going to a better place, sweetheart. I will always be with you no matter what. You will understand when you're older. I love you dearly." I was confused by what she had said back then. She gave me a goodbye kiss on the forehead, stood up from the bed, and faded in a gentle white mist. Literally, a minute or so later, my mom comes home crying. I could hear her and my grandpa talking softly about my grandmother, though I didn't understand at the time. My mom had come into the bedroom, saw me awake, and was startled. She had asked me why I was awake, and I told her that Grandma told me goodbye. I found out years later that my grandmother had passed away in her sleep, and my mom was called in to the morgue to identify my grandmother. My grandmother's recorded death time was about 11 to midnight, if I remember correctly. To this day, every now and then, I can feel my grandmother nearby. She always wore a rose-scented perfume when she was alive. It's not often, though. If I'm in a really dark place, she comes around to check on me. I miss her dearly, and I wish I had more photos of her when she was alive. This one is by you/Bessie_Y. Wardrobe. I don't normally talk about this just 'cause it freaked me out, but when I was around 11, I had gotten a new wardrobe. I was really excited about it as I needed somewhere to store my own clothes. The first few nights were fine. Then, as I was getting into bed, I felt something was off. A few hours had passed, it was midnight, and I wasn't able to get any sleep, so I played games on my iPad until I heard a knocking from inside the wardrobe. I pinched myself to make sure I was awake. I just lay there facing the wardrobe. I could see the wardrobe moving from the inside of the door, moving open and close only slightly so I couldn't see the inside. I finally got some strength to get up and run to my parents' room, and I asked them to check the wardrobe. Nothing was in there, and it was empty. Till this day, I keep my wardrobe doors wide open and I don't hear it anymore. I'd spoken to a friend about it, and she thought a spirit might have been stuck in there. Who knows? This is by you/Mermaid96. A ghost that made itself look like my son. Is it my brain or ghost baby? So, this morning, I was laying in bed in the process of accepting the day and getting ready, and I heard my bedroom door creak. I looked over and I saw a very small, dimly lit face come through the door and come up to my side of the bed. I thought it was my son, who is 5, so I rolled over and was about to ask him what he wanted. The whole body was a shadow, and the mouth, nose, and eyes were the only parts that were illuminated. He held up a baby doll and one of those magic baby bottles right to the front of his face and just stared at me. At this point, I knew it wasn't my son, and I did what any grown woman who made a 22 on her act in high school would do. Put the covers over my head and rolled to the other side of the bed. At that point, I felt the bed sink down like the boy demon thing got into the bed, so I then thought, okay, maybe it was my kid. And I looked over and there was nothing. So at this point, I know I have to do the proper investigation and see if my kid was in his room. Sure enough, he is still in his room, tucked away, sound asleep. I also feel it's important to add that my son's door is messed up and he can't fully close it, as it has to be finessed shut because the hinges are bent. So if he had opened the door, I would have heard a noticeable noise, and if he closed it, it would have slammed. This is also not the first time I have seen a shadow child try to get in my bed. I have about 3 other slightly less interesting stories involving this possible spirit. If you would like to hear them, let me know. This one is by u/Artivian_soul_707. Almost abduction. This happened when I was 9 years old. For the longest time, I thought it was a vivid dream, and then when I was older, my mom told me it had actually happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, and the entire house was bright and lit up in a way that was not normal. No lamps were on. It was as if the light was shining from above and filling the entire space. I remember feeling scared, and I walked into the hallway calling for my mom. I saw these dark, black-hooded creatures, beings, and they put off a very negative energy. I knew they were coming for me somehow, and they were trying to catch me. I became paralyzed and couldn't move. My mom came into the hallway and screamed, "You are not allowed to be here. You cannot take her. You do not have my permission. You need to leave now." The creatures/beings seemed to converse with each other telepathically, as if pondering if they wanted to take my mom instead, but decided against it. Then they just left. They evaporated or disappeared. The house suddenly was dark, as it was the middle of the night. I don't remember what happened after that. I assume my mom put me back to bed, or maybe I slept with her. The next morning I woke up and just had a foggy memory of a creepy dream. I didn't bring it up until years later, and that is when my mom told me that it wasn't a dream. It had happened. So, that's my ghost story. Dark creatures/beings wanted me for some reason, and I am very glad I wasn't taken. This one is by u/Breezy JOMC. Dreams during sickness. Very peculiar coincidence. Years ago, my college mates and I lived in an old 3-story house. The 3rd floor was one large den area. Our bedrooms were on the 2nd floor. On multiple occasions, we would hear what sounded like a very heavy person running around. It was loud and distinct. At some point during our year living there, I got really sick. It was pneumonia, and I was feeling absolutely awful. I was taking a lot of medication, some of which was codeine. I was sleeping hard. I had a super vivid dream where I was laying there in my bed, exactly as I actually was. I looked up and there was a man wearing a yellow shirt and overalls. He was a large man. I didn't feel afraid of him, just unsure of who he was. In my dream, I asked him who he is and he just disappears. This confused me when I woke up because I realized I've never noticed a color in my dreams before, or colors never really stood out in my dreams before, but the yellow shirt stuck with me for some reason. Anyway, a few weeks later, my roommate gets mono and she's down bad. She couldn't sleep, which is a very common symptom of mono. She felt like she was going nuts, being confined to her room without rest. One night, she finally got a few hours of sleep, but texted me freaking out that she had a nightmare. I asked her what her dream was, and she said she was laying in her bed, looking at her closet, and she saw a huge man wearing a yellow shirt and ugly overalls. We were both sick and exhausted, and for sure our brains do weird things when our bodies are working hard to get us healthy, but for both of us to see the same man in the same outfit, very strange. This is by you desperate_assist 4537 Farmhouse. Hi, my name is Ayushman Kurasaya. I am living in India, and here I am tell you once of my incident that make me believe that ghosts and supernatural things do exist. My approximate age is 12 at the time. I came to my farmhouse with my cousins. We play hide and seek and I give in. In my farmhouse field, there are no fences. It means we can enter other person's field. I entered the field, then I am seeing a person standing on the tree. I shout, "Hey Shivam, I am seeing you." He started running and suddenly in front of my eyes he disappeared and I am shocked. That is the evening time, so I think it's an animal. After a while, it was night. I tell my cousin that I was wondering why he was running when I am to catch him. He says, "Where?" And I say, "In the neighbor's field," and he shouted at me angrily, "Why you entered this field? It is haunted and the owner is committing suicide because his wife has an affair with another person, and then she ran away and he killed his own 3 children because of anger and also hung himself. That is the reason his spirit revolves around the field." I'm thinking he's full of shit, and it's a bullshit story, but during the night, I get a chill because the whole night I'm thinking I really did see a ghost. So please tell me your opinion. Is the ghost real, or is it a myth? This one is by you / my stummy -hurt. Getting pinched awake. I'm not an avid Reddit user, nor have I ever posted in a thread before, but I've been trying to find an explanation for what I experienced and saw, if anyone else has ever experienced this before. There's simply not much to the story, but last night, as I was in the early stages of sleep, I felt the strangest thing. It felt as if someone had pinched my butt so hard to the point it shocked me awake. It wasn't one of those falling dreams that jolt you awake, but a distinct feeling of someone aggressively pinching my butt with 2 fingers. I woke up in a panic with the reaction of jolting my hips forward and a lingering sting on my one butt cheek. Laugh out loud. Has anyone experienced this? It freaked me out thinking that there was potentially a spirit of some sort pinching my ass. Side note, I don't sleep with anything in my bed. I don't sleep with any other person or pet, and it was for certain not a bug bite. It was the most intense sensation of a 2-finger pinch. I am familiar with sleep paralysis and have experienced it before, but I don't think this is a valid explanation, as I was not paralyzed and woke up immediately from the sensation and felt a lingering sting after. Let me know, any thoughts on any similar situations? This one is by U/1316 Midnight 2419. Monster. When I was 3 years old, me and my sister lived in this townhouse. Our bedroom was upstairs and to the left, and my mom's room was down the hallway and on the right. And some nights on our window, we would hear a tap, tap, tap. One night, I needed a drink of water, so I asked my mom to go get me one, and she said no. So I asked my sister to come with me because I was scared. So we go down the 3 stairs, and the rest goes around the corner, and when we turned the corner, we started to go down the rest of the stairs. We seen this black figure with orange-reddish eyes standing at the bottom of the stairs, and we started yelling for our mom, and we ran to her room, and we were crying. She said, "Go to your room," so we did it. It didn't follow us. I still don't know what that was. Neither does my sister. God rest her soul. Well, I do believe that's going to do it for us this evening for story time with me, TessaTNT. I'm so glad that you guys joined me this evening, and yeah, super stoked. We finished another book, or novella, or whatever you want to call it. Finished Frankenstein, started the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Pretty good story so far. I've been enjoying it. I can actually hear the Scottish accent when I read it. I try not to do it though, because some people don't seem to like my impersonations. Anywho's, thank you guys so much once again for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed the Reddit ghost stories too. Sometimes you can tell when it's a person from another country trying to type in English because they say things a certain way, and so I try to read it as best I can so that you guys may be able to understand it. But yeah, pretty good ghost stories on Reddit tonight. Pretty sad about that guy that killed his kids and them himself. I guess that happens pretty often. And what do you guys think about the background music with the stories? Do you think it's something that we should keep doing? Just let me know. Leave a comment over here on Spreaker under We Are Paradox Media, or feel free to leave a comment on our YouTube or wherever else you may be listening. I try to check in on all the other places, but it's generally Facebook, YouTube, my email, Messenger, etc. And yeah, like I said, Spreaker in the chat room. Come over and hang out. It's pretty quiet on storytime nights, but I think most people are just enjoying the stories and catching up on some of their work. Canada just got done with their Thanksgiving, and we are just about to begin ours. Well, thank you guys so much once again for hanging out with me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It was such a pleasure having you. And thank you to all of my friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend when we have Paradox Paranormal Forum. It's also going to be my birthday, so we're going to have a lot of fun talking about the paranormal. And then on Sunday, we have Mama Mary Bassett, and she's an amazing psychic medium. She also does past life things where she can take you into your past life, etc. Can't think of the words directly. can't spit them out. I can't get them off my tongue. You guys, don't forget, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media. Because without you, there is no us. If you would like to join us next weekend on the Skype after party, we're not doing it tonight. I have to start my new job tomorrow. Super excited. Wish me luck. Send me some positive energy. Say a little prayer for me. Make sure I do a good job and Tassie likes me. I know we've met before and we really did like each other, but hopefully she likes working with me. But yeah, look us up on Skype under live:_Tessa.N.Thomas30 or write this number down for any future shows if you'd like to call in. Especially for Psychic Saturday, it's 970-335-9596. Until next time, nighty night, love and light, and you guys take care of my news. Happy Thanksgiving!